average, like, people would think a vaginal infection of trichomonas would be like a Gardnerella or something like that, just like another bacterial infection. Definitely can infect men as well, but it's just like more likely for women, and also to have those long-term effects that lead to things like pelvic inflammatory disease and such. So, of course, you want to know this organism because it's so common. Trichonympha, as I just mentioned, and how this, really, like, if you don't make sure that you really know the organisms, you can make mistakes like this. This one is worth mentioning because this organism is what's responsible for digesting the cellulose in the guts of termites. So when you're just thinking about the type of diversity that you see in microorganisms, it's worth mentioning some of these organisms because they're associated with such disease. There are so many of these organisms that are really associated with different processes that happen in the environment and ones that are associated with other animals. And so this one is just, I think, really of interest because you think of termites as being those little insects that you think are going to cause destruction to your house, but if they didn't have trichonympha in their intestines, they would not be able to digest cellulose. There's also some bacteria associated with them as well as part of it. Euglena was an organism that I mentioned as an example of one in which it had characteristics of the protozoa, the animal-like ones, and also of the algae, the more plant-like organisms. And what I mentioned in here, this was a phototrophic organism, a photoautotrope. But it can function as a chemoheterotrope. I mentioned also about it not having a cell wall. It has like chlorophyll A, actually chlorophyll A and B, which is one of the requirements for something to be called a plant. Something that undergo photosynthesis that's not a bacteria. They all have chlorophyll A, all of them. That was one of the criteria, but they also have cell walls. This doesn't have a cell wall. It has a calico like what a protozoa had. So it was just one of those grouping. And there's a number of euglenas. This is actually a large group, a large genus, I should say. We've got a few more examples in the excavata. One of them is leishmania. Leishmania, every time I have gone through, I sort of, scrolled through and you saw the really horrible picture of that poor man that has all of those bumps all over. Leishmania is something that, we do actually have it here in the U.S. It's not like really necessarily known, in California. It's more like Texas, kind of the southern area there. But all over the rest of the world, 88 countries, about 12 million people in the world, about 1.5 to 2 million new cases every year of leishmania, something that is definitely much more common in the Middle East. It's transmitted by these little sand flies when, they bite somebody. And there's 3 different forms of leishmania. There's a mucocutaneous, cutaneous, and a visceral, with the visceral being the most serious form of it. So it's something, here you see again with reservoirs, animals like dogs, rodents, people have picked it up through blood transfusion. So even though it's like something that you probably, like if you know people in the military, they might be more aware of this just because of all the actions in the Middle East. But other than that, it would be something that you probably wouldn't have heard of here. But when you hear those numbers and you think about millions of people every year, millions of new cases, then that's one of the reasons why we want to make sure that we at least are aware of it. So this is just kind of the disfiguring, the book is going to have like the ugliest of ugly pictures. If you've looked through our book, I'm sure you've seen some other really hideous pictures. So just very, very deforming when it gets to those full-blown cases like that. Sometimes also called as callus bizarre. Maybe fatal does have this particular, sand fly as a vector. So last time we mentioned something about vectors. We mentioned about the Anopheles mosquito being a biological vector and what a biological vector was. So here you're seeing again, this is a biological vector because you have a stage of the life cycle that undergoes like this particular, in this case, sexual reproduction in the sandfly. Okay, something like a mechanical vector, I didn't mention anything about what a mechanical vector is, but a mechanical vector would be something like a housefly or a cockroach, something that actually can walk through something, gather those organisms on its body. In case of like, actually both cockroaches and flies, they actually ingest stuff too and then regurgitate it onto things as well. But there's no stages of the life cycle that goes through that particular vector. So a vector is something that passes an infection from one place to another. If it's a mechanical vector, everybody knows about houseflies. When you talk about like, how I said that I'm kind of paranoid about like raw meat and stuff like that, I also definitely have a thing about houseflies too. Like at our house, like when a fly gets in, we're all just like, there's a fly in the house, and then we just like can't even like rest until the fly gets out of there. Just because flies particularly, like if a fly is in your house, like do you really think like it never landed on anything gross before it came into your house? Like, oh, it probably never landed on anything today. Flies just, they have like hairs all over their body which like pick up everything that they land in. And then they have like suction cup feet, that's why they can like walk upside down and everything. So when they land on stuff, they kind of slurp up all that stuff. Plus they regurgitate enzymes all over like a surface to start digesting that, and then they suck it up. So then when they land on stuff in your house, they already have it all over their little suction cup feet, all over their hairs, and then they're gonna regurgitate onto the surface what they just got through like slurping up before they landed on that. So, you tell me, did you be worried about flies? Yeah, they just are, when they culture flies, they find everything on them because for some reason, their bodies are very good at really, harboring those organisms. If ants crawl on things and then ants crawl into your food, you actually could just let the ants lead and your food would still be considered fine. As ants' bodies have formic acid in them, and that really like prevents the growth from a lot of things. It doesn't, like they don't harbor organisms. Cockroaches, on the other hand, are like equally like flies. Also, like cockroaches, when they're walking, they are literally regurgitating, defecating, and urinating all at the same time. So when they crawl across your things in your kitchen or whatever, like they will be dirty. Where again, if ants crawl across them, it's perfectly okay. So it just, that's where kind of, hopefully like knowledge helps you decide which things to be worried about. In our lab, we were doing well, we're going to be doing this actually on Tuesday, a bacteriophage experiment. Bacteriophage are particular viruses that attack bacteria. And in order to look at those viruses, especially the viruses associated with E. coli, and you guys know where E. coli is, an intestinal organism. So our lab book, our old lab book, had an experiment that we could do with bacteriophages where basically what you would do is have students bring in raw sewage, blenderize the raw sewage and filter it and everything, and then you could put it on a plate and then you could actually mix it with E. coli and see whether you got the bacteriophages, because bacteriophages for E. coli would actually be in the raw sewage because those particular viruses attack that E. coli. And so I wrote to the publisher and asked if we could get a different experiment for bacteriophages, because the idea of like I mean, I don't even think it would be legal from a public health standpoint, but it was in the book, like, oh, just bring in, don't forget your raw sewage next time, you know, and then like blenderizing it. That would just be so dangerous, really. So I don't know whether it had anything to do with my letter, but the new edition came out and they had a new bacteriophage experiment. Guess what this one was? Students had to bring in house flies. And then you had to use a mortar and pestle. Okay, needless to say, I don't really know which thing was worse, but the whole reason of just bringing that up is that that's equivalent, okay? Raw sewage, house flies, you're gonna get the same thing. So it's not just my paranoia about house flies. So like when house flies like land on your food or something, if you're gonna like eat that food soon, then you only have to worry about things like Giardia cysts or something. Because most of the bacteria, not all of them, but most of them have to have a certain infective dose. So if like flies land on your food at a picnic and then you leave that food out for like hours, that could be a problem because then the organisms could reproduce. Bacteria can double like in 20 minutes when conditions are just right. So you have 20 minutes, 20 minutes, 20 minutes, 20 minutes, and you could have a lot there. So it takes a while to get an infective dose. So if a housefly lands on your food, you could still like eat your food then, but you wouldn't want to like leave it out for a long time. But just one of those little things that if we're talking about the fecal oral route, that really includes flies as well, because everybody knows what flies are landing on before they come in your house, right? Except for like, oh, maybe that one fly never landed on any feces that you can just keep telling yourself that. And then you think about fly swatters. Yeah. So like, I would never use a fly swatter, but like, fly swatter, windows. Like basically, those just look gross. Basically, like, especially like if you have, you know, some way to make it dark in your house, all you have to do is close all your blinds or your shutters or something like that, and the flies will go towards the light. And then you're just waiting for them with your little Windex bottle, push them out, and then as soon as you've like kind of, it works. It's totally much better than using a fly swatter because that kind of like just kind of knocks them out. It doesn't kill them, you know. So then you can just like take something and just take them away and put them in the trash. But at the same time, you're using your Windex to kind of like disinfect the area. But they always will go towards the light. So all you have to do is like turn off all your lights and close things, and they'll go to like your sliding glass door or something. You guys have never done this before? No. So much better than like smashing some totally like bacteria-laden something like all over your window or like a surface where you're gonna like.
What are people that try to catch the fly?
I know. My own brother seriously like smashed a fly on the counter with his hand. I was like, oh, how anybody can do that? Or like I see people all the time that will put like their fly swatter on their counter. Okay, that's so gross.
Do you let them know?
It depends on who it is. I've gotten into trouble a little bit that way. Not everybody wants to know about things like that. But it definitely, I mean, I'm sure you guys have all seen this kind of stuff. I just saw something really recently, but fortunately for you guys, I've forgotten what it is right now. But I was just like, oh my gosh, I am going to totally tell my students about this and see what they think. Because there's just a lot of things that people do that, like, they don't really realize. They don't really realize that that is, like, something really dirty or that could really spread disease.
Why, in toilet seat, why is Adam considered more dirty than the actual seat?
Because the handle, like, if somebody's wiped, then they're going to touch the handle to flush it. So, anyway, you should know the difference between a biological vector and a mechanical vector, though. Just because there's so many things for the whole semester that you keep having to hear about the fecal oral route. So, understanding about the biological vector for these particular life cycles we've talked about, but understanding about mechanical vectors for really just understanding that goes right along with the fecal oral route. Which don't say I didn't remember that. There's never going to be a day that goes by that we don't mention it.
The biological vectors, that's when there's a life cycle that kind of inside
Correct.
bug or whatever, and then the mechanical one is when it just carries it.
It just carries. So you just think it's just mechanically carrying it from one place to another. And hopefully you won't think the same about cockroaches. Like cockroaches too, their bodies, just for some reason, really harbor a lot of organisms. They just like the pH and everything is just right, that they are just really a good place for organisms to grow. So they're kind of a problem. And that's why cockroaches are really, terrible to have in restaurants and stuff like that.
I know you haven't talked about trypanosoma yet, but when you Google that, you often get the trypanosoma. I think it's brucei or something. I see that more commonly than the gambians.
Yeah, because basically gambians is almost like a subspecies, because you'll see it'll say brucei gambians, but it's the same organism. Yeah, did everybody hear what she said? How you notice you'll see it'll say trypanosoma brucei, and also that's sometimes it'll say gambians after that, but it's all the same. They're different subspecies, but of the same organism that causes.
I think it was Wikipedia that automatically takes it to the brucei one when you look that up.
Yeah, because I think that at this point that the gambians is the subspecies, the variant, where it'll say brucei, sometimes it'll say VAR gambians. So, okay, of these though, really Trypanosoma cruzi, this one is really something that you guys are going to start hearing a lot more about. This is something that I've been talking about it for a lot of years now, but it's now really getting to the point where it's really recognized in really especially in California a little bit more, because this organism is known as Chagas disease. I was just kind of getting distracted thinking because I just saw it on a TV program. It's one of those new medical series called, I don't remember. It's not on one of the, it's on one of the cable things, and I'm trying to remember who.
Monster Inside Me.
What was it?
One called Monster Inside Me.
Oh, no, but I know that one. This one was a new one that's kind of like a house type knockoff. Pardon?
Isn't all the flies that are swarming around the girl?
No. It's just it's centered in a hospital and. No. But it's something like that. It's supposedly it's supposed to be a combo between Grey's Anatomy and something else. It has Molina, Alfred Molina, that actor.
Oh, I don't know. I know which area.
Okay, well, the one girl on it made a really huge ordeal about Chagas disease at one of their meetings. Yes. I would never remember it ever. But you pick up a lot of the stuff that we learn about in here. People will see it on House though, because that show what always likes to bring up just kind of those things that maybe everybody hasn't heard of necessarily. But Trypanosoma gambians and then Trypanosoma cruzii, both similar in the fact that they're those flagellated trypanosomes. That one of the things significant about them is that they can change their surface antigen, so they really are difficult for us to have a good immunity against them. So basically what will happen is you'll develop antibodies for those particular antigens on the surface, and then when the antibodies come, the antigens will change on the surface. So it's just something that really gives them, a benefit. But this particular organism, Chagas disease, is really, really endemic. Like, endemic means that there's always like a certain number of cases. Epidemic means when there's additional cases. So if you have like something that's endemic with just a small number of organisms, like say for instance, the bubonic plague is endemic here in California, there aren't very many cases, there's only a few cases per year. But if all of a sudden there were 20 cases, that would be an epidemic. In this case, this organism is endemic in South and Central America. In some areas, like you could have 70, 80% of the population affected. It's transmitted by this reduvian organism called a kissing bug. So in this particular case, if you have a reservoir, the reservoir would be all the people that are carrying the organism, and you have the vector, which is a kissing bug, then that means that you really have everything kind of there for an epidemic to occur. Okay, so when we talk about, say, malaria, you could have people who are carrying the malaria parasite, but because we don't have the Anopheles mosquito here, we don't have to worry at this point that we could pick it up. We do have those kissing bugs. They are in the Antelope Valley. And we have a huge population now of people that come from South and Central America who are carriers. And in fact, this particular organism did end up invading our blood supply, because people will come here, be carriers of the organism, not really know that they actually have the illness, because it can be one of those things that's chronic, and it wasn't being tested for in the blood supply. So people were donating blood, and then people were picking it up with blood transfusions. But it turns out that it is a significant cause of heart disease. And it's just taken a lot of years. Like, I can just think, like, I was introducing this organism 20 years ago as being something that really, that it was something that we were going to be hearing more about. For sure, we were going to be hearing more about, because we have vectors, we have the reservoirs. It's a significant thing, and it's taken like all this time really before it's actually being out there. Well, I do have students who have been, contacting me saying that, that they work at like St. County or one of the hospitals that see a lot of people that come here without medical insurance, and they're just seeing, now they're having some particular organizations that are really trying to get information out so things can be diagnosed. So here, let me see what some of the numbers are. I just want to give you some of the numbers. Okay, I'm not sure if I have it online, but 16 to 18 million cases per year, okay, of Chagas disease. And basically here, see, it's this chronic disease where you get the particular, in this case are called amastigotes, so that's like the particular stage, get into the heart. It's, can get into other parts too, but where is the part about the heart disease? Look at how many cases. Estimate about 50,000 deaths per year that are known. But at this point, they're thinking that it really is one of the leading causes of heart disease in the world. So this is really, really, really significant. And the fact that we have the reservoir and we have those particular bugs. If you look here, that one I keep going through is the TC fly, but this right here. they're like redudia types that have the little like crisscross, like when their wings fold, you kind of see that little crisscross part on their back. If you look at this life cycle, it kind of will be another one of those things, oh, that sounds so disgusting, because basically they call them kissing bugs because they tend to bite people on the lips. And when they bite, they defecate, just like, unfortunately, a lot of insects are kind of like that, with that urinating and defecating and regurgitating thing. They leave a little feces there, the bite is itchy, people scratch, and that's how they introduce the organisms into the body. So when you're talking about something that this is this endemic, this, you know, really frequent in, you know, Central and South America, then it's obviously something that is easy to pick up that way. That bug looks like it would be big, like you would be able to see that, but usually these kinds of bites happen at night. So somebody is sleeping, it gets in the house or whatever, bites somebody, and then they don't realize it, just like when we talked about the pinworm thing, somebody like, just, oh, I have an itchy thing on my lip, and then that's how the contamination occurs. So there is like this life cycle that, again, you can see this is a biological vector in this case too. But I'm not going to ask you to memorize the life cycle, but it is good for you to see that, you know, these kinds of life cycles are known and understood. These are the first way in which we can attempt to start to control the diseases by understanding exactly how this occurs. So you want to make sure that you know something about this particular organism, even if I'm not asking you to write out the life cycle. So something that you're going to be hearing about more and more. Here too, seeing this no treatment available at the chronic stage. So this is by the time that it's really causing heart disease, they're not really knowing how to treat it. If you got a chance to look at this, then you would have seen like a slide that looks like this. This one is a Trypanosome gambians, and that's like the little teeny fly, Glossina fly, that is also a biological vector. It's funny to me how many people actually know about tsetse flies, because I like to do crossword puzzles, and like a lot of times you'll see like tsetse fly. It's one of the things that I always think, like, how would people like know tsetse flies unless they like never study this kind of thing? But have you guys ever heard of a tsetse fly? Some of you. Yeah. But I do want you to know about Trypanosoma gambians, or Trypanosoma brucei gambians. Sorry that I keep going back and forth, because I was just wanting to make sure that I got it from the beginning. Yeah, also it says for brucei that it causes damage to the nervous system. But I would want you to know about the heart disease thing. So again, with that, you're not going to have to know all these symptoms. Knowing about the heart disease is going to be something that you should be aware of. So knowing about an invasive organism, bloody diarrhea, you know, these occasional symptoms that come up that are significant, and that is one of them. Again, then with Trypanosoma gambians, this is just important because it really causes a lot of problems worldwide, with not just people actually getting the disease itself, but also animals getting it. About 300 to 500,000 new cases per year, about 800,000 deaths per year with Trypanosoma gambians, 100% fatality rate if untreated, so people don't really recover from this. We talked about this a little bit in lab, and that's the idea that somebody will get this, you know, also called, of course, African sleeping sickness, because of the fact that when people get it, it affects the nervous system. People get very lethargic. They just basically stop eating. They're sleeping all the time, and then they just like start to deteriorate. And that's what happens with the animals. So cattle, so you see here, reservoirs include domestic cattle and other animals. So in parts of Africa, this is very, very significant because they can't keep the cattle alive. And then not being able to raise cattle in some areas means that there's not gonna be good sources for meat, for protein, for nutrition. So it has more of an effect than just causing the disease in humans, but it has a very significant effect because of the difficulty in raising cattle.
How many cases per year then?
Cases, oh, and by the way, like, when I throw out the cases per year, that is really helping you have an idea about why something is important and why it's significant, because to me, like, when I read about how many cases, I think like, oh my gosh, that's so significant. That just helps me commit it to memory better. But it's about 300,000 to 500,000 new cases per year. Since we talked already about fungi, I'm gonna like move on just a little bit. So that ended Excavata. With a supergroup Amoebozoa, we already talked about Amoeba histolytica, but now we have this organism, Naegleria fowleri. This would be one that if you did watch House, you probably have heard about Naegleria at least a couple of times. This causes something called primary amoebomeningitis. It's I might have not even said that completely right. Where is it? Meningoencephalitis. But this particular organism is something that's actually a free-living protist. Free-living meaning it's not really a parasite. It's one that actually is like happily living in a water like a lake or a pond. If it just ends up getting someplace where it doesn't belong, then it can really cause a lot of problems. So this is a very rare, but it's always mentioned because it has 100% fatality rate. Okay, and usually maybe about 10 to 15 people per year get this in the U.S. and die from it. And basically what happens is, did you have a question?
I think you might be talking about it.
Is that they are, you know, going to, and this is why you don't think you hear about it too much in California, but like a couple years back, there were actually 2 boys that got it at Lake Elsinore. But jumping into the water, have you ever jumped into the water and gotten water up your nose? Okay, that's how people can get this free-living protist, jumping into like ponds and, you know, like those swimming holes and places, you know, they're not chlorinated. Again, in California, we don't have a lot of that. If you're in other parts of the country, you know, that's like typical, like kids that, you know, go to those local lakes and stuff. If maybe you lived in an area where there are, you know, more besides like Castaic or, yes.
Is that what they say, like, have you heard of a neti pot? They say use distilled water with that so you don't get microbes from your science. Have you ever heard of that?
Yes, I have, and I think that this organism right here, Acanthamoeba, I think that that is the one that is the concern. Because Acanthamoeba is like similar, so I'm going to mention that one in a second. But with Naegleria fowleri, that's kind of the concern, is that if it gets up into the sinuses, it gets into the brain, and there has not been anybody that has survived. So it's like they get it, they start having symptoms, within a week, then they pass away. So that's kind of why this one, even though it doesn't affect that many people, it is something that like you will hear about it occasionally, and because it has that, you know, 100% fatality rate. Acanthamoeba is kind of similar to if it gets someplace where it doesn't belong, but they have had cases with Acanthamoeba as being contaminated in like contact lenses, like when people don't use sterile water for contact lenses, and then it's caused eye infections, caused blindness, and I did hear about it associated with like those neti pots, that because you're getting like that water up into your sinuses. And those are becoming, those like neti pot things that people use that I guess you like tilt your head a certain way and it has like a little kind of, I'm not sure how the shape is because I don't use
It
one.
looks like a teapot.
Like a
It's
little
just used
teapot,
in
and then it like goes up and then comes out. I don't know, I'm like,
It's
I have
tricky.
sinus problems, but it's just like, that just doesn't sound like.
It works for a lot of
But it
people.
really does help. If you have
It's
really
weird.
sinus headaches, it can be really allergies.
You pour it
It does
in
help.
this.
I do, I have problems with
It goes
sinus
through your
headaches, but I
sinuses.
can't like bring myself to do that. And then I had a student that she came in here and she's like, I don't know why everybody says how good that is, like it makes you feel like you're drowning for like, you know, that minute, and then it left her like with a kind of like that burning sensation, like when you get water up your nose, and like, okay, that just like set it in stone that I don't want to use one now. But they're really popular right now, and I know like more and more like doctors are suggesting to try them and stuff for sinus problems. But anyway, acanthamoeba, so something that has been associated with infections with, I was gonna see if I had any numbers. I tried to like regularly look up and see if we have like any new statistics or whatever, but I don't have any numbers for that, but there have been outbreaks with this particular one. Let's see if there's anything more mentioned here. This primary amoebic meningoencephalitis, that's the one associated with Naegleria, but it could be acanthamoeba as well. This keratitis, that's been associated with the contact lenses. So it says you should always use like sterile solutions for contact lenses, because it seems that acanthamoeba is more likely to be found in like other water sources besides like just like a lake or swimming pools. So you see here too, the treatment, no drug therapy available, and this, do not use water for contact lenses, and use always under a sterile state. That is a picture of Naegleria fowleri. This is really nice that you can see like how irregular shaped the amoebas are. So, and how much more three-dimensional they look. Like you think of them as being kind of flat, but they're kind of interesting to look at. And then maybe lastly, in this little category right here, we go back to that initial slide, slime molds. I want you to understand that slime mold used to be classified with the fungi, but they classify them now with the protists. Okay, and that's all I really want you to know about slime molds. You may have gotten a chance to see a culture of a slime mold before. We're not going to really learn about the slime molds in here. You might come across some of this information when you are reading about fungi. There's some pictures in here. Yeah, like we used to like regularly have this one sitting out in lab. You know, they're very interesting to look at. That just because they don't have, you know, any kind of real tissue, any tissue differentiation, then they kind of, we're trying to figure out where should they really belong. Should they really belong in the molds? Because they do have these structures. I mean, you see here the spores and a sporangia and such. But right now, they're with the protists. That's where it looks like they're going to stay. And so that's really all that you have to know about them. If you watch those science programs regularly, though, you usually see some really nice, you know, photography of these kind of interesting ones, though. And then that will be it for today. This one right here, if you go on to read in supergroup criteria, this is the one where there was the one exception of the first rank, and that's these coming up right here. So, in lab, I'm not going to go through and talk